I asked David Roll to talk about the important consequences of a bias against the Bible as a historical document.
Well, the thing is that history is not the past. The past is what happened. History is our best guess at what happened. And what we use in terms of ancient history to determine what happened and try to interpret it is archaeology. That's our tool that we use. So we dig into the ground, we find objects and texts, and we try to interpret them, construct a history out of that material. But there's also another piece of evidence that we don't use very often, and that's the Old Testament, the Bible. That is a work of history. That is a source for us to interpret what happened in the ancient world. And yet scholars don't use it that way. They don't use it that way because they think it's a work of fiction. They don't actually believe it to have happened, that those stories are not really true. Now, I take a different approach. I say, why not treat the Bible just like any other ancient historical document? We look at it, we read it, we look at what it says, and we try and check it up against the evidence. We try and perform a synthesis between the archaeological evidence and the stories in the Old Testament. And if we find a match, why not accept it and make that history? If we don't find a match, then we can dismiss it. But the fact is, I do find matches. Other people do find matches.
So what you're saying is that there are matches there, but they're being ignored. Is that why this denial of the ancient stories of the Bible is happening?
Scholars can't really avoid this question of whether or not the biblical stories are historical or not. And they've come to the conclusion that they're not. This is most of the scholars, I'm saying, not all, especially the secular scholars, will say that the biblical stories are not true. They're not based on real history, real events. And the reason for that is simply because the archaeologists have not found any corroborative evidence in the ground to confirm those stories. And it's a catch-22 situation. If you have no evidence in the archaeological record, then we're in a situation where you can't really say the stories actually happened. There is archaeological evidence for the later stories of the Old Testament from about the 9th century onwards. Let's say from the reigns of Omri and Ahab, we start to get connections between Assyrian records and the stories in the Bible. So that's okay. But anything before that, there is no real evidence at the moment. And the reason why that is because they've been looking for this evidence in the wrong strata, in the wrong layers at the sites that they're digging. And so you're not going to find evidence in that situation.
And what have you found?
I found, again, this problem is all about time, that they're looking in the right places, at Jericho, at the Eastern Delta in the land of Goshen. They're digging in the right places, but they're not going deep enough to find the Israelites. They're not going early enough in time to find those Israelite occupation levels.
Was there a tendency to want to discredit the Bible in early archaeology in the 1900s?
No, I think that the early days, everybody was genuinely interested in finding evidence for the biblical story and expected to find it. There was no reason why they should not expect to find it. We're talking about a very different period to we are today. Scholars in those days were very Christian, very based on the Bible, and everything was about finding the Bible in the Holy Land and in Egypt. And over the last 200 years, there's a definite, tangible sense of disappointment that they have not found that evidence. That every time they try to confirm this structure, this timeline in the archaeological evidence, they've not found corroborative evidence. So, for instance, when we look at the city of Ramses II's great city, where you would expect to find a large population of Semitic slaves, Israelites if you like, you don't find it.
You don't find it at the city of Ramesses?
No. You don't find those people, those type of people, living in the city of Ramesses. But, and this is the interesting thing, you dig down deeper, lower down, in a slightly different part of the location, but it's still part of Ramesses, the city of Ramesses. You dig down lower down to an earlier level, and we find another city called Avaris, and that city is a vast city, and it's all a Semitic population. So that matches the story of the Bible very well.